The summer between my junior and senior years of college, I learned something incredible that would change my life. I had enough credits to graduate without taking a full load of classes. It was so awesome. So I did what any college student would do. I made the decision not to graduate early. Okay, not everyone would do that, but that's what I did. And I decided I would take some easy classes that would not help me at all in my job, but would be fun to take, and I would get a job. And so that's what I did. I was in Liberty. William Jewell College is there, and at the time, the city was just starting to get things other than Walmart. And across from Walmart, they were building some new restaurants, and I found the restaurant that I needed to work at. My last name is Schreckengast. It made sense that I would work at a place called Schlotzsky's. Funny name, serious sandwich. And I applied, and I went through the application process, and I thought, I'd fill out the application, they'd call me back, I'd come back for an interview. Turns out that if you can have a coherent conversation, they hire you on the spot. And so I went to apply for a job, and I left with a job. The training process was fascinating, just like it is anywhere, right? They told me all kinds of things I didn't need to know, would never need to know, didn't want to know. And then they taught me the really important things that the reason I was there, like how to make a sandwich. It was so great to learn how to make Schlotzsky sandwiches because I could make one today if I had the right piece of bread. Working at Schlotzsky's means you have to cut up tomatoes. That was not my favorite part. It means that you have to sort the lettuce in the way it's supposed to go, and you have to have all the right cheeses and the garlic butter and the mustard, and the sauerkraut comes in a can, and you have to wring out the excess moisture. It's really gross, but it makes for a great sandwich. And so along the way, we tasted all the sandwiches. We did all of the things necessary to prepare for the first day of operation. And I went to class in the morning, and I worked kind of in the afternoon/evening, however that worked out. And so I went to class, and on opening day, I made my way to Schlotzsky's. Left campus, drove all the way across town, and as I got close, I thought Schlotzsky's looked weird. It didn't look exactly how I expected it would look. I expected there would be a line of people like around the drive-through and down the road and all this stuff. Instead, I pulled up literally to an empty parking lot. I was confused, but I thought I should probably report for duty as assigned. And so I got out of my car and I made my way up to the door, and on the door was a handwritten note that said, "We are closed." Day one. We are closed. Why? Because Schlotzsky's had run out of bread. They baked bread for 24 hours a day, but they couldn't keep up with the demand because everyone wanted a Schlotzsky's sandwich. And without bread, Schlotzsky's really doesn't have much to offer because most people aren't coming for a bag of chips and a cookie. And so my first several shifts, I was canceled, and I learned a little lesson along the way at Schlotzsky's, and we're going to discover in life, without bread, you have nothing. It's good to see you today. My name's Ryan. I'm one of the pastors here at the Summit, and today we're kicking off a series called Soul Food, and if you were going to make a list of the things that I like to talk about, one of the things that would be on your list, if you know me at all, would be food. Of course, I love to talk about food. I like to eat at restaurants. I like to cook at home. I enjoy a good meal, and I would imagine that some of you do as well. And so today, we're kicking off a 3-week series where we take something as prolific and as common as food, and we're going to think about what it might mean for us in our spiritual lives as well. Because believe it or not, there is a little bit of crossover. Because what you eat, you can become, or so I was told. I tested that out this week. And I decided to see if I could become a Reese's peanut butter cup. It turns out that even the week after Halloween, I cannot consume enough to become a peanut butter cup. But it is true that everything you consume has an effect on you, right? So when I eat a peanut butter cup, I go out and I run 5 miles to get rid of all those calories. Nope. I just eat another peanut butter cup because peanut butter cups are so good, one after the other. And if you've never considered this, you will also know that this is true. I mean, think about this. If someone has an allergy to food, it typically doesn't affect them if it's in the package away from them. It affects them when it is ingested into their body. For some people, it's a bite. For some, it's an entire dish. For some, just being in the room. But it's the coming near in contact with your body that makes a difference. For some, it's instantaneous. For some, it's over time. But it's the internalizing that changes things. And so today, we're going to think about what we consume. There's this really incredible story that begins in John chapter 6. And Jesus is interacting with this crowd of people. And there's this idea, this thread that pulls through in John's gospel and even in John's epistles, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, that teach us something really important about what it means to have a relationship with Jesus. And the word is this, it's minnow. The word minnow is one that's probably not particularly familiar to you. It's probably not one you use in daily conversation. This is a Greek word, and it means to remain or abide. It means to be a part of or stay near. This word, minnow, is speaking very clearly and very directly to the proximity of two things. When one thing minnows another, it stays close to it. And seeing how this impacts us and affects us and how it might overlap with this idea of soul food actually begins in John chapter 6 as Jesus is interacting with a group of people. Jesus is traveling around and he's healing the sick and he's doing miracles, and a crowd begins to develop and they follow him. In fact, they follow him to this mountainside on the Sea of Galilee where Jesus is talking to his disciples. And as they're talking, he looks out and he sees the mass of people. And Jesus knows that it's almost mealtime, which means that these people in the middle of the wilderness will have nothing to eat. And so he says, well, how are we going to feed them? And it becomes clear that there's no store they can go to. DoorDash or Uber Eats is not yet a thing. And so Jesus is going to have to solve this problem on his own. And so he does. Jesus looks at the crowd and has compassion on them and wants to provide a meal for them. And so they find a boy who has a lunch that's been packed, a meager lunch, 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. This is a story that perhaps you have heard somewhere along the way. And Jesus takes this food and he blesses it. And it becomes abundantly more than they're actually going to need to feed the people. And in his compassion, Jesus meets their need. It's an incredible thing to see, because these aren't nobility, these aren't the kings, these aren't the people with money, these are the common folks who are out following Jesus around. They're peasants, they're farmers. And without his help, they literally have nothing. And so they eat and they have their fill. In fact, the scriptures tell us that there are leftovers in the midst of this miracle. In the middle of the night, Jesus and his disciples gather up their things and they get in their boat and they set off. They leave so they can find a quiet place to be. And the people wake up and they're trying to figure out, okay, what happened to the guy who was healing people and giving us food? And they were determined to find him, and so they hired their own boat captains, and they found their own way, and they too set off across the Sea of Capernaum, and they went to find Jesus. Just 10 miles away, Jesus and the disciples were at Capernaum, spending time together when on the horizon appear the masses coming to find Jesus. And they land on the shore, and they said, "Why are you here? When did you leave?" And this is where we pick up the story. This is how Jesus answers them. In John chapter 6, verse 26, Jesus answered, "Very truly I tell you, you are looking for me, not because you saw the signs I performed, but because you ate the loaves and had your fill." Jesus is doing incredible things. And yet the crowds are only thinking about where they're going to find their next meal. And Jesus takes this opportunity to begin to draw a line for them between what is physical and what is spiritual. Verse 27, he says, "Do not work for food that spoils, but for food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. For on him, God the Father has placed the seal of approval." In other words, you wasted all that time, 10 miles across the sea, finding a boat, paying a captain. If you came looking for a loaf of bread to meet your physical need, you showed up for the way wrong reason. He continues, "For the bread of God is the bread that comes down from heaven and gives life to the world." And I'm not sure they get it, because they follow up with this. "Sir," they said, "always give us this bread." John chapter 6, verse 35, Jesus declared, "I am the bread of life." I'm guessing there's going to be a Thursday afternoon in the near future where you eat so much that you will say you're never going to eat again. Is that fair? But you always do, and you always will, because we always come back for more to meet our physical needs. Have you ever heard of the word hangry? I'm married to someone who is afflicted with hanger. When there's no sign of the next meal, watch out, folks. If you're eating one meal and you've not yet decided what is for the next meal, you need to watch out. It's the most fierce anger you can imagine, and it only is satisfied by eating food. Hunger is no joke. And the reason hunger is no joke is because hunger is such an interesting thing. When I get up in the morning, I have a plan to eat food during the course of the day. Do you? See, I get up in the morning, and sometimes I have the best breakfast you could possibly imagine. I go to Chick-fil-A, and I get a chicken biscuit and an iced coffee. It's nutritious, it's wholesome, it's filling, and there's really not much better. And here's the thing. After I eat this meal, it will be just a few hours when I decide that it's time for another meal, right? And so maybe I get in the car and I drive across town and I make my way to Mali Thai Bistro. Incredible Thai food. I'll eat this heaping pile of chicken pad Thai. I get it medium and then put Thai chilies on it to make it as hot as I can tolerate. There's a salad and crab rangoon that goes with it. I mean, it is incredible, and I leave there thinking there's no way I'm going to eat dinner, but then I remember that I'm married to someone who gets hangry. And so I get home and I have dinner, and sometimes my dinner looks like this. I prepared this recently: a steak and green beans and corn on the cob and some incredible bread, and it's wonderful. And if it happens to be October, you know what's lying around. There are peanut butter cups everywhere, and you need to have some. And you go to bed satisfied, don't you? And yet when you get up, there's that hunger that comes again. Those 3 delicious meals spaced out across the day satisfy the need in the moment. And yet tomorrow, there's hunger once more. And Jesus says, "I am the bread of life." And it's so interesting that Jesus chose bread, right? I mean, bread's a normal, basic, average food. You can make it with things that aren't extravagant, and you can have something that you can consume. It's plentiful, it's readily available, it's fairly easy to make. And it's also a profoundly sacrificial theme. Jesus gives himself to us as bread, food and drink that he offers so that we can have a daily rhythm of coming back to him. This idea of God providing food would not be new to the people who are hearing this, right? I mean, these people knew the Old Testament. They knew all the details. They would immediately be thinking, okay, God gave bread in the Old Testament to the people of Israel who were traveling throughout the wilderness. And God provided the manna every day. It would come down. It would satisfy the needs of the people. They would have just enough. Except on the 6th day, they would have enough for the 7th day, so God could rest and they could rest. But this manna would be just the right amount, so much so that, if you tried to hold it over till the next day, it would go bad. It would be infested. And not because they didn't have refrigeration, but because of something far greater. But it was because God wanted them to remember his provision in their life. The psalmist writes in Psalm 78:24, God rained down manna for the people to eat. He gave them the grain of heaven. And they remember in this moment, as Jesus says, I am the bread of life, the fact that God has always provided for them. That God has given them bread, that has provided sustenance to them time and time again. And in this moment, what was simply an understanding of physical bread that could meet their needs, a switch is flipped and it becomes deeply spiritual. Jesus is from the town of Bethlehem. If you can't remember that, just remember the song, right? O little town of Bethlehem, how still we see thee lie. The word Bethlehem is translated as the house of bread. And it would make sense that the Messiah who comes and says, I am the bread of life, would come from a town with a name like that. And Jesus underscores what he's bringing to them, what he gives to them, what only he can offer in John chapter 6, starting in verse 56. This is the words of Jesus. He says, whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood remains in me and I in them. They minnow, they abide. When you feast on the things of God, you abide in him. Just as the living Father sent me and I live because of the Father, so the one who feeds on me will live because of them. This is the bread that came down from heaven. Your ancestors ate manna and died. But whoever feeds on this bread will live forever. The message that Jesus is driving home to us is so clear. When you commune with him, when you abide with him, when you minnow, that's how you find eternal life. Jesus is concerned with feeding the spiritual lives of these people. His statement is an invitation to an ongoing communion. The living bread is an everyday meal. It's not an occasional treat. It's not that birthday cake that you have once a year. It's what you eat daily to stay close. Jesus wants to have a constant presence as he demonstrates his grace in everything that we do. What we eat and what we drink goes with us. You know that's true because you've heard this before. A moment on the lips, a lifetime on the hips, right? What you eat goes with you. Jesus takes something we understand, hunger and eating, and he takes it out of the physical world and places it squarely in the world of the spiritual realm, where it gains even more meaning. Because the question isn't if we're going to eat again, is it? The question is what we are going to eat. You know that I enjoy a good meal. I like to cook. I like to go to restaurants. I like to have food. That's an important thing for me. And so I thought that today I could give you some tips, some hints, some tricks about how to properly eat. Are you ready for this? When it comes to eating bread, I'm talking bread in the physical sense. So, I've been thinking about going and having deep dish pizza for lunch. I can't stop thinking about it, mainly because you can't get it anywhere around, I think. But it's kind of like thinking about Chick-fil-A on Sundays, right? You just, for some reason, it just comes to your mind. And so as I think about what I'm having for lunch, I think about these three truths. Number one, partake regularly. When it comes to eating, we partake regularly. One meal isn't enough, is it? Your grumbling stomach will tell you that eating in the morning is not going to do it, or eating in the evening simply isn't going to cut it. And so we eat 3 meals a day, or we take Taco Bell's advice and we have 4th meal. But whatever the case might be, we eat more than once. We know that to be true. We experience that physically day in and day out. The second thing, check the label. I love it now when you go and you start to get start to order something. I went to Panera recently. I'll just tell you the whole story instead of trying to be vague about it. I went to Panera recently, and I'm part of the SIP club, right? And so I get unlimited iced tea. I love that, unlimited iced tea. It's great. And I looked at the menu, and I was about to order the macaroni and cheese, and then I saw it was like 14,000 calories. And I decided not to get that. And instead, I didn't get anything to eat. I just had iced tea because you need to check the label and see what you're putting in your body. You can't eat just anything. Yes, you need crumble cookies sometimes. You do. But you can't eat only crumble cookies, can you? At some point, you have to eat something that's nutritious and have a balanced meal because the choices you make will ultimately become clear to everyone around you. The third thing is to invite others. Adding people adds meaning. Adding people adds meaning. Don't get me wrong, eating alone is glorious. I love going and eating by myself on occasion. But a holiday gathering with your family is fine without food, and it makes memories with it. But these words on eating are just a shadow of what Jesus is talking about. It's a hint. Because when we eat spiritual bread, there are things that we can do as well. Things like this. When you eat spiritual bread, partake regularly. One meal isn't enough. We're adults in this room, for the most part anyway, and we don't expect someone to plan our meals for us and to cut up our food for us. We know that we need to eat, so we eat. Adults make the assumption that feeding themselves is their responsibility, and once a week isn't going to cut it. It's true with our physical food, and it's true with our spiritual food. It's a daily choice to find the time or make the time to be in communion with the bread of life. The second thing, check the label. What you've been consuming becomes evident over time. Just like what I'm eating for dinner is going to become clear as my clothes get tighter. What I'm consuming in my spiritual life soon comes out of my mouth because that's what's planted in my heart. So each day, find something that you can read or do or people you can spend time with. Whether it's a reading plan on your Bible app or a prayer that you spend with a spouse or a friend, or maybe this one, I love the Seedbed wake-up call. It's a daily email that comes to your inbox with incredible theology and encouraging words. This can change your life as you consume daily the things of God. And the third thing is to invite others. Adding people adds meaning. You were not meant to follow Jesus alone. It's that simple. In fact, I'm not even sure it's possible because this community of faith is here to support and encourage you to share your joys and your pains and everything that happens in between. If you want to minnow, if you want to abide, it requires that you do it alongside other people. That's why we have classes and groups and gatherings and all those things. In fact, yesterday, we transformed this place into something that made an incredible difference in the lives of people. This section right over here was our Rise Against Hunger meal packing station. There were 70, 80 people here, and all 70 or 80 of us could have gone out and done something in the community. It would have been awesome. We could have fed a homeless person or whatever that thing might have been. But together, we packed 10,000 meals to make a difference in the community. It's amazing what happens when God's people come together and commit to doing things that glorify Him and move His kingdom forward. When I walked up to the doors of Schlotsky's that very first shift, I was shocked that we had run out of bread. It never occurred to me that that was even a thing. But I still needed to go to work, and I still needed to see what I could do to help us move forward. And though we didn't feed people at Schlotsky's that day, it's still an incredible reminder of what it means to eat bread, to abide with Christ. Because in the grand scheme of things, I can have some great meals. I can find them at restaurants around town. I can cook them at home. But ultimately, there's only one meal that ultimately satisfies, and it's the bread of life, Jesus, who never lets us down.